Hey, what's up guys? I'm Evan. Today I'm going to be showing you how to improve your website using an awesome tool called Lighthouse. Now in my last video about how to make a website with Expo, I showed you guys Lighthouse, but I didn't realize that most people don't really know how it works or what it is. So how do I describe this? Well, I don't actually know how to make a website good. I'm not what you might call a talented developer. So what I do is I use a tool which tells me every possible way that I could improve my website's function, performance, loading, SEO, accessibility, PWA, all those things, and they all just come in a nice neat little list, and it has hot links, and I click those links and then it tells me exactly how to do my job, which is why programming is very easy for web developers. Native developers are superhuman. And in short, it takes all the mystery out of optimizing profiling your website. It started as a Node CLI, and then it was turned into a Google Chrome extension, which was very popular because you could just run it with one click in the browser. And then finally, it got full integration into the Audits tab, and we will use that in this tutorial, and I will explore it. You can also use it with CI, or your continuous integration. That means you can use it with Circle CI or Travis CI. When you have it as part of your continuous integration, that means that if someone makes a commit or opens a PR, you can automatically run it and see how that PR will change the performance of your website magically. So to get started, open up Google Chrome. And I'm going to stop you right there. You don't want to open up a regular Google Chrome window. You actually want to open up an incognito window. So Command-Shift-N, and that will pop. I don't know why I told you the hotkey. Now the reason you want to do it in incognito mode is because you probably have a lot of Google Chrome extensions or other things running in the background, and those will drastically change the scores of your audit. So let's just head over to a random website. I'm going to go over to mountaindew.com or something. Yeah, mountaindew.com. Great. What I want to do with this is I want to inspect how it performs in my browser. So if I was a developer at Mountain Dew, what I would do is I would go Command-Alt-J, and I can open up the developer tools. From here, I can open up the Audits tab right there, or you could do Command-Shift-P and type in Audits, and it will open Show Audits. Now from here, I'm gonna go ahead and close the console. I've got the Audits tab. Now this is Google's Lighthouse tool running in the browser. So right up at the top, you can choose what kind of device you wanna run it on. If you choose mobile, it will change the screen size to a mobile screen size, and it will also change the user agent. Now the user agent is a string which dictates what kind of device it's running on, more or less, like an iPhone or an iPad or a MacBook, or like a Gucci toilet or something. And if you do desktop, basically nothing happens because you're running it on a desktop. Underneath that, you can choose which kinds of tests you want to run. For the first test, I'm just gonna run all of them, but I'm only really gonna be talking about performance and best practices. And that's because I wanna milk the other ones for different videos. Underneath that, you have throttling. Throttling is going to emulate a slower device connection. If you choose something like simulated or applied, which I highly recommend, then you're going to get slower Wi-Fi, very similar to the kind of Wi-Fi that people like me can afford. Underneath that, you have the clear storage option. Now, this is going to emulate what it's like when someone visits your page for the first time. This is enabled by default. If you have it enabled, it's going to clear the index.bb, the local storage, and it's going to do stuff with the service worker to make it appear like you are hitting this page for the first time. Quick pro tip, I actually never disable this tab, and if your content looks anything like mine, then you shouldn't either because you probably won't have repeat visitors to your website. Let's go ahead and run an actual audit here. Hit the running audits button, and it's going to, run things in a simulated environment. You can see the frame is a little here and there. After it's done loading, you're going to get the Lighthouse report. You see up here at the top, it's telling us just generally how all of our tests did. This first test that it runs is the performance test. This number is kind of the overall score for how your website performed. Right underneath this is the metrics. Now this is going to be a breakdown of what determined the overall performance. You have first contentful paint. Now this is going to be the time at which you had that first image which made any sense. That would be, if we look at this trace down here, this image right here, and then we have this speed index. Now this is how long it took for everything to fully look complete. It knows this by calculating the last image by the beginning image and determining if it looks like it's a fully completed website. And then you have time to interactive. The time to interactive measures how long it takes before you can actually interact with your website and start clicking around on buttons and dragging around text input fields, things like that. The baseline for this is 5 seconds. So to actually get good TTI, this means that your layouts need to be stabilized, your resources need to be downloaded and usable, things like the fonts and then your render thread needs to be idle, which means that it's not doing any more rendering at that moment. I'm sure those were all wrong. Take it with a grain of salt, you know.
The channel rule.
Estimated input tells you how laggy your website is. So you want this to be as low as possible, obviously, like any of these numbers, but you want it to be under 50 milliseconds. Otherwise, people are going to think it is laggy. The way I found this out was actually by hovering over the box, and then it will tell you that right there with a Learn More button, where you can link to a tutorial, which, fortunately for you, is not one that I made. Underneath this are these screenshots of the experience. You can use this to make sure that things are loading in properly, especially if you have like fonts that are loading in and maybe you want your text to not render until the fonts have fully loaded in, or if you want your text to render and then update when the fonts have loaded in. Ideally, you want to also load in your elements in a certain way, so things like the header bar and footer bar, and then the kind of placeholder elements, and then have all the content actually loaded and populate those elements. So this actually comes from the Performance tab. If you hit View Trace, it will jump you over to Performance, and you can iterate through this and kind of see how everything looked. You see it fades in really nicely over here at Mountain Dew. We're not going to get too much into this Performance tab today because there is a lot of cool stuff going on here, and no cool stuff in my videos. That's the rule. Underneath that, you're going to have the opportunities. Now, when you're actually optimizing your website, you're going to go through these opportunities, and you're usually just going to go down the list and start to try and mark all of these off, and that's going to make your website perform even better, or at least that's the strategy that I generally go with. So as you can see right here, the first one, very helpful, serve images using the next generation formats. If you just update your images, these will like all go away. Using newer image formats like JPEG 2000, JPEG XR, or even Google's WebP are pretty easy solutions to this problem. Now, something to watch out for is that Lighthouse is only testing for JPEG and BMP images. It'll also only warn us if there are potential savings of 8 kilobytes or more. So technically, you can also optimize images that Lighthouse doesn't warn you about, things like PNG images or images with 7 kilobytes or less savings, which of course doesn't sound like a lot, but if you have a ton of smaller images, like for whatever reason all of your icons are PNGs, then that could become a problem. Now, there are a few ways to optimize your images. The first is to use the image element's srcset attribute, which lets the browser decide which image it wants to use based off of resolution, width, height, things of that nature. You can also resize your assets during the bundling process. I'm not sure about Metro or Parcel, but I definitely know it's supported with Webpack. You can serve assets from your CDN or Content Delivery Network to dynamically resize images in the server before the client receives them. There are lots of great services for this, things like Amazon CloudFront. Finally, you can just optimize your assets manually. This can be done in Photoshop like a noob, or with the Expo Optimize command from the Expo CLI. You see how easy it is to be a programmer? Now, I wanted to get to this one, number 5, eliminate render blocking resources. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's something like if you have a script tag and it's loading a remote resource, it needs to download that resource and parse that resource before it can continue to render. That's render blocking. So we can actually find what these render blocking resources are right down here. Very helpful. So they have like all their styles are coming in remotely. They have Slick Carousel by Mr. Ken Wheeler, more styles, jQuery twice, and styles again. Now you can actually test if these render blocking resources are critical to the website loading by resource blocking. Now we can do resource blocking by hitting Command-Shift-P and then typing blocking, show request blocking. Now what this is going to do is it's going to define which resources we don't want to load. And we can then go and look at the page and see if those were breaking the page or something. Hit add pattern and we can look at right over here. You see we kind of do like /npm/slick carousel. So we can type in like slick carousel or just like npm/star. Hit add. And now if we go over to the network tab and let's go ahead and close this. If we refresh this, then you're going to see some of these load in as red. That means that they were blocked and they didn't get loaded in. So we can actually scroll through the website now, and you'll notice that nothing appears broken at all. I don't know this website, but if it's your website, you'll know if something broke or not, and you can do this to determine if you needed that resource or not. Here we can clearly see that we do not need Slick Carousel loaded in until later in the app. So we can defer it or something and make it not block the resources. Another way to defer the resources is to move them out of the head tag and to the bottom of the body tag, or at least that's the old school way. Now you can use the defer keyword or the async keyword, and those will make it asynchronous and not block the thread. That's if you do need the resource. In this case, we don't. If we run that audit again, it won't be downloading those resources, it'll be blocking them, and we'll see if that improves our scores at all. So as you can see from this first test, we have a performance of 56. If we jump to this new test, we have a performance of 58, meaning that we were able to bump it up a full 2%. That's great. I mean, we didn't have to do really anything, and I don't even have the source code for this, and I was able to fix it just from the browser. Very powerful tooling. You can do a lot of cool stuff with it.
Like get hired and make people think that you're a good open source developer.
That's its most impressive trick, really. And now, finally, the last thing in this diagnostics panel is the past audits dropdown. You can open that, and you can see all the things that your test passed on. If you need like a good pat on the back, I like to open up my websites, go to the past audits and see what I did well, even though usually this stuff is done by the bundler, like minifying the CSS and JavaScript, but I like to think that I had some hand in it by making the website. Now with that out of the way, let's actually look at some predetermined examples that I have of Lighthouse tests. So right here we have the Expo Web blank template. As you can see, hundreds across the board, perfect PWA. This is what it looks like to have a perfect website. Of course, it's great, it's the greatest. Use Expo Web. Now, quick pro tip, if you're using something like Netlify or Amplify or any other hosting service to host your static website, you are going to notice that the numbers sway based off of if it's on staging or if you're serving it locally or if it's served in a prod URL. So for instance, right here I have this Expo managed thing. You notice hundreds across the board, of course. I'll say it one more time. If I go to the staging URL, you see I have 90 on the SEO. The reason for this is because it's a staging URL and I've got like this no indexing going on, and you'll also notice certain things in best practices about hosting with HTTPs or not redirecting with HTTPS. Those will sway your score, but that's just because of where it's hosted, so just something to keep in mind. Anyways guys, thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know down below, especially since this is a different kind of video, no coding, and I will see you in the next video.